Anastasios Papakonstantinou. High Strategy Principles. Roman Contribution to the Philosophy of War. Athens 2013. Dedicated to General Georgios Karaiskakis, a man who would render even the most eminent generals jealous by the way he led the war. High Strategy Principles. Forward. Plato's Republic. Book 6. The military leader of Plato's Republic must be a philosopher, said Socrates. Glaucon, Socrates' brother, asked him, "Why do you say that, master?" Socrates replied, "Have you ever trusted your instincts?" "Yes," replied Glaucon. "Have you ever trusted your eyesight? Have you seen the middle fingers of your hand and observed the changes they undergo when they receive some injury?" "Of course, master," says Glaucon. "But have you also trusted your touch, Glaucon? Wouldn't your touch tell you the same things your sense would reveal to you? Wouldn't the pain you felt reveal the same things?" "Certainly, master," says Glaucon. Then Socrates says, "It's the same with strategy and strategic decisions. A general may have seen with his vision through study, in other words, the mathematics, physics, geometry, and doctrines of generals of the past, through always the study of books. But wouldn't the same thing happen if a man on the battlefield learned the same things and, in fact, managed to survive after a long period of war and win great victories? Wouldn't he have the same knowledge without being taught all that in a military school? Wouldn't it be the same?" "The same," replied Glaucon, "and I'd prefer the ideal head of state to be a military leader of the second kind." Socrates then said, "One thing is certain, Glaucon, and I think it is obvious. Both leaders, the one who learned it in a school and the second who learned it in battle, know the same things." Plato, The Republic, Book 6. This book was written by the second type of strategist, a philosopher who did not attend a military school as Plato would have preferred. Genghis Khan was a leader of the second type. The territories he conquered, along with his people, encompassed most of Eurasia, and he created the greatest empire this world has ever known. The Mongols, his people, whom he united into a single fighting force, formed the most perfect war machine in world history. The methods, strategies, and tactics he employed remain unmatched to this day. With an army of just 10,000 men, he conquered China, Central Asia, Persia, the Abbasid Caliphate, and Russia. After his death, his vast empire was divided into 4 major administrative centers. 1. The Great Khanate. 2. Gagadai Khanate. 3. The Persian Khanate. 4. The Khanate of Kipchak, or Golden Horde, which included the Volga, Kiev, and the rest of eastern Russia. Many Russians still believe in the legacy left by Genghis Khan and the ideals he fought for. Genghis Khan, as we have already said, was a leader of the second Platonic category. The countries he eventually subjugated encompassed the whole of Eurasia and were larger than those of Alexander the Great. In 1206 AD, he was recognized by the Mongols as their leader. The Mongols were not, and are not, Turks. General Zhukov, Marshal of the SSD, one of the 4 greatest generals of all time, and universally recognized as one of the 5 greatest military geniuses of all time, was a very important figure. Genghis Khan assembled initially an army of 10,000 men, which later grew. He believed in the biological superiority of his race. He destroyed the kingdoms of the Chinese and the Persians, and the emperor of the viceroyalty easily conquered medieval Russia. His legacy and influence on all the people he ruled are still strong. Genghis Khan received no military training of any kind. This book was written by the second type of strategist, a man with Roman, Pontic, and Greek Sidonian roots, a man Socrates would have chosen, rather than graduates of the best military schools, as the ideal military leader of the Platonic state. A military leader who learned nothing in any military school, just as he learned nothing in any comparable school of the past. Genghis Khan. Genghis Khan created the greatest empire this world has ever known, but the author of this book argues that mankind should seek peace and true unity within a single confederation where international law will prevail. About The theory of high strategy has long been a terra incognita since there has hardly ever been a complete theory on the subject. This book is just such an attempt to give its readers the complete definition of high strategy. High strategy on a grand scale is not a task that can be left to ordinary people. With high strategy, people, organizations, states, and empires collapse. High strategy is a matter of enormous responsibility. Successful high strategy, leading to geopolitical victory, comes at a high price. The lives of millions of innocent people who have been or will be born depend on the decisions of those who practice this strategy. Just as millions of Greeks were dispersed to different homes after Kemal's triumph, or hundreds of thousands of Cuban anti-communist exiles and their families were torn from their ancestral homes, because of the mistakes of the leaders who governed them, but also because of the success of their enmities. The mistakes of the Cuban leaders led them into exile and to the harsh reality they experienced. Because of the high strategy and decisions taken by those who exercised and ignored it. Had they faithfully applied these simple lessons from the book, they would have prevailed over the communists, since they were stronger and more effective at every level than Fidel Castro's forces. All this Guevara did should not have happened. Yet Batista's corrupt dictatorial regime should also maintain certain pretexts, but the Cubans and their dictator didn't think of all that for their ruin after leaving Havana. Democracy and human life are sacred. Shouldn't Mr. Batista know that? Respect for international law is one of the high strategy rules contained in this book. Those they should accuse as friends of themselves are their corrupt and incompetent leaders, and they should make sure they don't repeat their mistakes, but, on the contrary, try to correct them. Failure to do so usually destroys the offender. The same thing happened with the Greeks of Asia Minor. The Greeks of the treacherous Prime Minister Gunaris and their dynasty, who are not Greek but Danish, completely disregarded the rules and principles of high strategy, which will be explained below. Our last emperor was Constantine Palaiologos. The others were foreigners whose crimes but led 2 million Greeks from Asia Minor to the grave, and the remnants to the misery of exile. The same is true of all people. The realities of high strategy are cruel. The dead, the refugees, those persecuted for their political activities, those persecuted for religious reasons, and the immigrants are the result of the misapplication of high strategy. Political leaders need to understand all this, the rules of high strategy that will be set out just below. If they have basic intelligence, they will follow them. If they ignore them, they do so at their peril and will regret it either quickly or when it's too late. The Principles of High Strategy is a book that describes methods for crushing armies, organizations, people, countries, and empires. It was not written to serve the interests of any nation or any ideology. It is a book written for all mankind. The theory of high strategy has been terra incognita for several millennia, as no comprehensive theory has ever been formulated around the subject. Implementing a high strategy is a task that can only be undertaken and achieved by geniuses, can crush nations, countries, and peoples, destroy empires, and create empires. Whoever truly possesses its secrets can become extremely powerful. The high strategy theory. The theory of high strategy is, for many countries, knowledge that is not allowed to be used by people who do not master this subject in depth, because near knowledge is worse than knowledge. Ancient Greek worldview. Those wishing to apply the theories reflected in this philosophical manual are advised to do so with full knowledge of the subject, and not with incomplete knowledge. This is an important point, as few military authors have dealt exclusively with the subject. This is what this book attempts to do. High strategy on a grand scale can only be put into practice, as we have said, by geniuses of the highest caliber. With it, its possessor can defeat rival nations, break countries economically, and even create empires. Whoever applies the absolute principles of high strategy with method and speed can acquire great power. Repetition is the mother of all learning. Tension. High strategy goals and high strategy actions look and sound very unsophisticated. Their application, however, is the most difficult thing on earth. The cooperation of other people, soldiers, strategic players, spies, money, etc., is very important for implementation. Technological achievements can accelerate the success of high strategic objectives. Scientific research, especially that related to the war industry, must therefore never be neglected. War is a matter of life and death. High strategy sets the objectives to be achieved in war and hopes for victory. When strategic actors succeed in imposing their will on opposing strategic actors, they reach a point I call the peak of strategic power. Here, the strategic actor imposes his will on a defeated strategic adversary, individual, country, alliance. This does not mean that he can partially demand what he wants. Prudence and wisdom play a major role even at this point, which can intoxicate the mind and make even the most coherent thinker lose touch with reality. Psychosynthesis of the strategic actor. For a strategic actor or an individual, a state, or a civil organization to achieve its objectives, they must possess material power, preferably great, extraordinary mental capacity and commitment to the goal. Charismatic character and moral or religious principles would be ideal. Moreover, luck often plays a very important role in high strategy. Changes in political leadership, the demise of strategic players, shifts in attitude, and the political aspirations of other states play a decisive, sometimes decisive role in the course of events. The objectives of high strategy are often in conflict with the objectives of other states and strategic players. This is where the difficulty and beauty of high strategy emerge. In the end, it's the most capable who wins, but also the one who already has genius. A useful and invaluable guide to high strategy is not always enough. You need money, titles, political office, and much more besides. Finally, personal passions and desires, although normally an insult to the principles of high strategy, can often be decisive in the course of warfare and constantly change or can change the data of high strategy, and often determine the outcome. High strategy requires an extreme use of forces. Errors arising from mental benevolence, as Clausewitz put it, are the worst of all errors. But there's something that surpasses them: inertia, or even worse, inaction. Mistakes are inevitable. But the enemy makes mistakes too. That's inevitable too. The man who makes no mistakes in the realm of high strategy approaches the divine. He is something like a demigod, or one of those few men to whom history has given the title of great. The rational use of the means at your disposal is an achievable thing. Bolder things belong to superior human beings, to superior geniuses. All strategic players need to understand this basic principle of high strategy. Rational high strategy actions aimed at destroying or temporarily disabling their enemies means defending their gains, personal or national, or gaining absolute power over their adversaries or a specific group of people, e.g. a political cohort, a municipality, or a community, permanently or temporarily. Similarly, in a more rational spirit, to gain control over other foreign sources of wealth, or in an even bolder spirit, to gain physical control over foreign provinces or entire countries, permanently or temporarily. The charismatic personality. The charismatic personality has always played, and will continue to play, an important role in high strategy. Charismatic people are different from other people. Charismatic people have a surplus of genius, a strong mind, imagination, and the ability to make quick decisions. What's more, they have an inexhaustible energy which, if combined with a love of their country, usually translates into political decisions that benefit their people. In general, foreign leaders are attracted by the personality of these people, something that is very good for them. But charisma is not enough. It often leads to self-destruction. It must be followed by an indomitable will and a commitment to the goal, which sometimes clashes with human nature itself. When this obstacle is overcome, the preconditions are in place for the charismatic person to excel, and for his or her country or ideological group to exploit him or her, or vice versa, something that puts the strategic player's enemies in an awkward position. It's impossible to crush a virtuous, moderate, morally perfect, and charismatic strategic player. If we understand the rules of high strategy, if we understand its importance, we can make our nation, our country great, or our ideology dominant, whatever it may be. Having realized these things, we can begin the methodical planning of high strategy. Once the strategic players have understood its importance, they can begin high strategy planning, which, however, requires the utmost seriousness, both in drawing up plans and in implementing them. There is another category of people, those whom history has placed in the category of the great. What they did is recorded in history, but also in the victims, that is, in the unwritten oral traditions. But very few people on the planet, even today with all the technological achievements of modern times, can achieve a fraction of what the greats of history achieved, who applied the principles of high strategy, which are timeless, prevail in this book, and will exist as long as mankind continues to survive. Definition of war. War is organized violence designed to give strategic actors more power than they already have, or to maintain the power they already have. At the collective level, this applies to states and international organizations or alliances. The power of sex, recognition, greed, the pursuit of glory, ideology, political domination, and the satisfaction of dark desires. These are the true motives of a strategic player before entering the dangerous game of high strategy. Risk is an integral part of the players involved. But the personal benefits are such that they ultimately drive a human being to engage in the dangerous game of high strategy. When the war is defensive, the defender's thoughts are, firstly, the salvation of himself and his family. Secondly, the salvation of his country. Thirdly, the salvation of his religion. And fourthly, the survival of his ideology. All these elements are constantly present in the minds of the defenders. Their spiritual balance, which is an essential element for ultimate victory. This balance is determined by the intensity with which they think them and the predominance of their logic over their passions. The leader of the opposition is the brain, the master thinker, and the center of gravity of an enemy state. If we control his mind, we've already won in any era and any country in the world. High strategy definition and key concepts. High strategy definition. High strategy is the mobilization of all human resources, but also all natural and industrial resources and economic, diplomatic, and military power in times of peace or war to achieve national strategic objectives. War is not man's natural state. Man is born good, not evil, as advocated by the British philosopher Thomas Hobbes. The absence of an abundance of resources necessary for survival makes the same man born good the worst beast on earth. Beast which, in war, makes even the behavior of the beasts of the jungle pale into insignificance, and is capable of greater crimes. War is a morbid phenomenon, given the destructive power of the nuclear weapons now at our disposal. Humanity must be restrained if it is not to experience similar or even worse moments than the tragedies of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The war and U.S. Never and nowhere has the opposing general felt sympathy or love for a foreigner, nor let alone for a foreign political leadership. If they try to get close to you, whether you are a man or a woman, if they show feigned affection, they do so to serve personal ends or to use you for their strategic planning towards their own country. Without realizing it, you'll soon be serving their interests, and when you oppose them, they'll get rid of you. How they do it varies. Thus, the general of another country, as is natural, is already your enemy, since he has sworn to serve his own country, and must therefore do so by divine right. But if he belongs to the same alliance as your own country, it's up to him to decide whether to destroy you or, at any rate, what to do with you. You have to be careful how you treat them, but the general of the foreign country, whatever he says or does, is already your enemy. In war, if you're foolish enough to knock on his door, asking for help at the critical moment, you're already destroyed, unless you give him everything you've got or his political leader approves. If you do, you're a strategic player who hasn't fully understood the principles of high strategy, and in no time you'll be a slave to the country to which you've given everything, or you'll be dead. High strategy focuses on subjugating countries, or letting countries be subjugated by others. Sometimes, high strategy pursues other objectives, such as empire building. The highest form of high strategy is that which seeks to give its possessor world hegemony. This is exactly what Alexander the Great, the Greek-born son of Philip II, king of Macedonia 356, June 13, 323 BC, shortly before dying of fever, attempted to do in Babylon. Alexander the Great understood this, and when Darius offered him his daughter as a wife as well as many provinces of the Persian Empire, Darius was a bit like the American president. The current one is Barack Obama, only Obama is more competent than Darius. He replied. Alexander replied to Darius, "What you have is already mine, i.e. Darius' daughters, and when I want to take something from your kingdom since it's already mine, I'll do it, or if I want to give you something, you can ask me directly." Alexander the Great, 356 BC 323 BC, was a master of high strategy. The basic facts of a real war. In a real war, in an open armed conflict, there are two enemies, two opposing sides. Let's take a few examples. Whether you're German or Jewish, whether you're Bolshevik, whether you're Tsarist, whether you're Greek, Macedonian, whether you're Persian, whether you're American, whether you're jihadist, whether you're Soviet, whether you're Nazi, there can be no true friendship or any form of friendship between you. Your enemies, real enemies. The same applies to a war with many enemies, political parties, etc. If you're smart, you should choose one faction, not two or more. There is no neutrality in war. When you're in the war zone, if you try to be neutral, if you're neutral or sympathetic to both, you'll end up in the madhouse, in prison. Or worse, you'll most likely end up dead. For these reasons, in a real war, if for example you're Jewish and you don't feel opposed to the Nazis, and their atrocious acts, or if you're Jewish and you help the Nazis or the Jews in various ways, you're a traitor. In war, and not necessarily in peace, traitors are executed, often with horrific torture. It's a basic principle of high strategy. These are the basic realities of real war. And also, another fundamental fact. There can be no real friendship or rudimentary friendship between, say, a Jew and a Nazi German for a very long time after the confrontation between them has ended, which is true for all peoples and for all times. Now, the civilian, Jew, German, etc., has the choice not to harm his enemy. The combatant, Jew in uniform, German, etc., has no such choice. He will do what his commander tells him or he will die, he will be executed. These are the realities of real war. One last, very important thing. Your allies, or some of them, may intend to destroy you. Never forget that. Take it for granted if they have shown indifference towards you at a critical moment. In an alliance, if this happens, they will already have betrayed you once because of your mistakes. You need to be on constant vigilance. They're bound to turn against you. If they did it with one of your predecessors, it doesn't matter, you're something different. Try not to have the luck of your predecessors. Generals don't win victories by engaging the opponent in a large, decisive engagement, as Clausewitz preached. In high strategy, this rarely happens. The whole secret of high strategy lies in putting your opponent in such an unfavorable position that he will either be destroyed by one of your moves, collapse or die on his own, or be so weak that when you decide to attack him, you will be in a position to crush him completely. The same thing can happen with several opponents, but in this case, it's imperative to crush them successively. Not many Alexandrians are born, not many Alexandrians can be born. Likewise, you'll never have the true love of the allies or other strategic players you work with. They may need you, use you, or fear you, but there's no way they'll love you unless you have such a charismatic personality that they willingly pursue the same goals as you. Always keep these things in mind. A fundamental principle of high strategy is that when other strategic players don't need you, they usually turn against you.
War Klassifikations.
Baron de Jomini's analysis. Summary of Baron de Jomini's great masterpiece, The Art of War, by Baron de Jomini. The Art of War, L'Art de la Guerre. Baron de Jomini attempts a classification of wars that is not far from reality. Double Wars and the danger of undertaking two wars at once. Offensive wars to regain rights, politically. Defensive wars, militarily offensive wars, wars of opportunity. Wars with or without allies, wars of intervention, aggressive wars for conquest and other reasons, wars of opinion, national wars, civil wars, and wars of religion. These are the causes of war according to Jomini. But I'm going to attempt my classification of wars. Officially formulated by me in the Principles of High Strategy, the causes of conflict are as follows. Conquest. The Persian Wars 490 to 479 BC. Alexander the Great's campaign, Rome's wars of conquest, and Genghis Khan's conquest of Asia were all wars of conquest. B. Religion. Islam against Byzantium, 7th century, 1453. Islam versus America, 1991 to 2013. The tragedy between Pakistan and India, 1923 to 1949. Constantine the Great's campaigns against the pagans, 313 to 324 AD. In modern Europe, typical examples are the most important examples are the Crusades, the Teutonic Knights in the Baltic, and the 30 Years' War between Protestants and Catholics. C. Political ideology. This is the war waged between the Bolsheviks and capitalist forces in Russia and the wider territories of Tsarist Imperial Russia, which culminated in 1920.
Des dynastiques succession.
Classic examples. The Spanish War of Succession, 1701 to 1714. The Austrian War of Succession, 1756, 1763, and countless wars throughout the world in medieval times. E. Economic reasons. The wars waged by the Spanish conquistadores, 16th century, which define this form of warfare, are a typical example, as are the wars waged by Western imperialist powers against China. F. Racial ethnic cleansing and genocide. A typical example is the systematic extermination of South American Indians by the Spanish. Extermination and racial cleansing of North American Indians. Mixed conflicts. Such a war involves two or more of the elements that characterize the above-mentioned forms of warfare. One such war was the Second World War, fought both to secure German habitat and the racial mass. Murder of the Jews. Basic principles of high strategy planning. Defense is easier than offense. This is the most fundamental principle of high strategy. It's easier for a nation to maintain what it already has than to acquire new ones. The primary strategic planning of a nation's leaders must be in defensive form. Offensive high strategy should not be the first choice. Whoever pursues an overly aggressive strategy against a powerful adversary or a powerful rival coalition is doomed to be defeated and lose his power. My Roman ancestors told me so. Beatus and Possidens, blessed are the owners. A high offensive strategy exists when a state or alliance attempts to expand its territory significantly, weaken its enemies, extract new sources of wealth or exploit existing ones, eliminate dangerous persons hostile to it, break hostile alliances, or humiliate a hostile state or person. Aggressive high strategy also exists when a state or alliance creates a network of nations dependent on that state, through policies that the attacking state controls fully or partially. Another form of aggressive strategy consists in openly undermining a country's economy, filling it with economic migrants or drug traffickers who spread white death among the children and young people of the target country on the altar of anonymous profit, but also the desires of that country's enemies, with the ultimate aim of paralyzing that state's internal cohesion, so that it becomes vulnerable when they strike the final blow. An aggressive, high-level strategy can also pay dividends by shattering a country's economy, rendering it over-indebted, armed with corrupt officials, and unfair taxation or tolerance of tax evasion by the target state's officials. It can also pay off in the destruction of mineral resources, water pollution, the destruction of forests, and more dangerous forms of subversion, such as the destruction of the target state's economy, achieved by polluting its waters or coastline or islands with dangerous chemicals or poisons, through agents or traders of the target country's inhabitants. By sabotaging oil and gas wells, gas supply companies, and pipelines. Finally, by blackmailing the strategic players involved in these economic activities, with the ultimate aim of bringing them to a complete halt, delaying or acquiring them from the very people implementing this aggressive high strategy. Strategic players who use these techniques run a great personal risk. Their lives can be interrupted by hostile actors, by the target country's intelligence services, in any number of ways, which is why they don't venture out very often. The aggressive high strategy to be implemented requires intelligent planning and superhuman efforts. As we have already emphasized as well, one must engage in strategic planning and constant monitoring of the forces involved, friendly or hostile, as much as possible. Aggressive high strategy demands superhuman effort and the absence of error. It does, however, entail risks, but the determination of the strategic actor and the impeccable cooperation of the leaders can make it succeed. It will lead to an improvement in the geostrategic position of the state that implements aggressive high strategy, and bring glory and profit to the bold strategic actors who implement it. The essence of high strategy. The essence of high strategy is contained in the following sentence. The high strategy simply controls the simple strategy. It determines what the simple strategy will do in the war. It determines when the war will end and what the situation will be after the war. High strategy always controls simple strategy before, during, and after the war ends. Here are some useful words. You may not care about war, but war cares about you. Whoever wants to be safe must take care of his defensive vision or have very strong allies.
Si vis pacem, para bellum.
If you want peace, prepare for war. Roman wisdom. A state should never neglect its defensive armor. It should never leave its officers fasting, but as we used to say in Byzantium, unlike Westerners, it shouldn't leave its soldiers fasting either. Appropriate use of the rules of high strategy will not only keep a nation or country with a relatively small military force safe but also improve its geopolitical position. Unlike simple politics, however, in high strategy there are no means of exchanging power, no rigged games. Where there are two stakes, there are no political games. There is a winner or a loser, or the maintenance of the current status quo. If a dynamic solution is attempted, death or prison awaits the loser. Benito Mussolini, hanged upside down by the Italians themselves in 1945, along with his unfortunate mistress Claretta Petacci. It's the epitome of the truth when it comes to high strategy.
Malheur à celui qui traite ces questions à la légère, surtout s'il est un homme politique, malheur à la nation qui a ce politicien élu comme chef.
High strategy choices. There are seven high strategy moves. They seem very simple, their implementation, but is the most difficult thing on earth and can be accomplished by individuals with incredible spiritual gifts. These high strategy moves are designed to give the state actor a better position against his adversary. 1. You can adopt a defensive position. Keep what you have. 2. You can attack or take an offensive position. 3. You can call on allies, bearing in mind that they may refuse to help you, as has happened many times in Greek, European, and world history, much to the disappointment of the naive who thought otherwise. 4. You can sow discord or anxiety in the enemy to delay him. 5. You can wait for a more favorable moment to strike. 6. You can strengthen yourself, state, army, economy, institutions, and then crush the enemy in the way defined by your strategic plan. 7. You can create an empire. Any ordinary person can understand these things, but few have the spirit, mental strength, or will to implement them. High strategy decisions. In the planning and, above all, in the escalation of conflict, high strategy decisions are taken by a limited number of people, sometimes just one. It is they who hold in their hands the responsibility for a nation's destiny. I call these individuals the dominant strategic players. The three most typical examples in world history, one from antiquity, one from the Middle Ages, and one from modern times, are as follows. Ancient Sparta, the most classic example from antiquity. The Mongol army, the most classic example of the medieval era. Nazi leadership, a classic example of the modern era. High strategy decisions must be taken in the interests of the nation, but by rational people or at least charismatic madmen who perfectly apply the principles of high strategy, like Julius Caesar, or they will fail. Geopolitical power. A good way to measure a nation's real geopolitical power is to use the equation proposed by the American intelligence officer Ray S. Klein.
P równa się C plus E plus M X S plus W.
Where P equals geopolitical power. As power increases, the country can aspire to more ambitious geopolitical goals, but the status of a particular strategic player cannot be calculated with precision, even by the greatest genius. However, the magnitude of the geopolitical power of a particular nation or coalition is gotten from Klein's equation. An American intelligence general. Thus, the real geopolitical power of a particular nation is derived from the following equation.
P równa się C plus E plus M X S plus W.
C equals the country, its resources, and physical configuration. E equals economic power. M equals military power. S equals strategic capability. W equals the government's willingness to implement a strategy to achieve national goals.